right about now. The Funk Soul Brother, check it out now. The Funk Soul Brother, right about now. Right up now, check it out now. The Funk Soul Brother, right about now. Now.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Right About Now podcast. This is John Small. Oh wow, today we are going to go back, way back, to the 1700s, 1776 actually. But this is a very different 1776 story than my American listeners are used to hearing. This is the story of Captain James Cook. Now, I'm not talking about Captain Hook. And I'm not talking about Captain Kirk, although Kirk was apparently based on Captain Cook. James Cook was a legendary British explorer and map maker who set off for what would be his third and final voyage. And he had one mission. It was to find the mythical Northwest Passage. But what he ended up discovering instead would change the world forever and cost him his life. It's an amazing story told brilliantly in a brand new book called The Wide, Wide Sea by best-selling author and famed historian Hampton Sides. And yes, that's his real name. His real name is Hampton Sides, greatest name ever. He tells this, you cannot believe it's true story of the expedition through not only the eyes of Cook and his crew, but also from the perspective of the native people who were often seeing Europeans for the first time, if you can imagine that. Smelly Europeans with their lice in their hair and their teeth falling out. But the result is absolutely fascinating. It's a cautionary tale. It is a road trip beyond all road trips. It is a tale of the clash of two civilizations and really like an examination of the consequences of this period in our history. Well, if you don't already know Hampton Sides, you should. He's really one of the best narrative, nonfiction, historical writers working today. His books include In the Kingdom of Ice, Blood and Thunder, and Ghost Soldiers, which is one of his most award-winning books. But on this episode, we talk specifically about his book, The Wide, Wide Sea. And I was really curious to know what drew him to Captain Cook, especially now in today's day and age, and why this voyage was different from all the other voyages that Captain Cook took. We talk about the tense and ultimately brutal murder of Captain Cook and some of his crew. We talk about the abundant sexual escapades of the crew and the local women, which occur throughout the book and are somewhat fascinating. We talk about how Cook's behavior changed over the course of the voyage, how he kind of went from being this enlightened explorer to this mean, paranoid authoritarian. Then we get into the legacy of Captain Cook today, both in the West and also in the Pacific, and the challenges of telling stories like Cook's, which include, empire and exploitation and cultural contact. So, I am thrilled to bring this interview to you live and in stereo. I ask you to close your eyes and imagine that you are getting on a wooden ship and setting out to discover the Pacific Northwest with Captain Cook and his crew. Hampton Sides, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Good to be with you.
I am so excited to talk to you. Loved your book and just loved going on that voyage with Captain Cook and his crew. What an amazing story. I am just very curious of what drew you to write about this figure in the 21st century. It's sad to say, but in some ways sort of a brave decision that you made to write about somebody who's controversial, at least by today's standards. And You even, I think you note that you went to Hawaii to a part of the island that's hard to find, that kind of has a monument to Captain Cook, et cetera, and then it had been defaced, and all over the world, statues of him have been taken down and red paint has been thrown. So he is a controversial figure right now. So I'm curious why you chose to write about him at this point in time.
I found that the controversy surrounding him made him more current, made him more contemporary. It seemed like this old story from 250 years ago suddenly had a pulse again. And I guess I embraced or confronted or, just tried to at least deal directly with the controversy throughout the book. It animated my research. It made me more interested in him. And, I guess I am kind of drawn to these conflicted characters who, in history, who were perhaps perceived as heroic in their day, but who are being reassessed in modern times. So actually, the controversy was part of what, for better or worse, maybe this doesn't speak well of myself. I say bring it on. Bring on the controversy. I certainly don't want to be canceled or to have some sort of reactionary dismissal of my subjects or my books. I do think that I tried very hard to be fair to Captain Cook. I'm not really there to defend him or make an apology for him, but I'm not there to attack him either. I'm right down the middle. I'm also trying to understand the Polynesian point of view and the point of view of all the other indigenous people who he encountered along the way. And I hope I succeeded in that. I certainly tried to make this a three-dimensional portrait of a very important voyage that I still think has a lot of ramifications, lasting consequences that we're dealing with even today. And I also think Cook's voyages, all three of them, but especially his third, tell us a lot about the modern world and about sort of how the global economy got started. There's a lot of contemporary resonance that these voyages of discovery had and continue to have on the world stage.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that I think too often today people are afraid to talk about certain historical figures or historical moments because they don't kind of jibe with the current way of thinking about this stuff, at least in certain circles. Mm-hmm. So I really do applaud you for doing that, and I loved reading about it personally. I think you did a great job, a very balanced approach. I want to talk a little bit about the process of writing the book, because there's obviously there's a disproportionate amount of journals from the English side, because everybody kept well, not everybody, but a lot of the people on the ship, including Cook, kept very detailed, I guess, journals, or you can tell me what you researched. Yeah. But on the Polynesian side, or on the more indigenous side, there's probably less written material, and a lot of it is like word of mouth and storytelling, et cetera. And so how did you tell me a little bit about the research process? Like, it sounds like a bear.
Yeah, well, on the English side, there was no shortage of material, because not only Captain Cook, but almost all of his officers, anyone who was halfway literate, was writing down stuff because they knew it was going to be significant. They knew it was going to be, by this point, Cook was already a celebrity back in England. People were writing sort of unauthorized journals, keeping all kinds of notes, publishing their own accounts. And then I have the official accounts from Cook and his highest officers, and just thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of stuff to work with.
Now, did you go to like a lot? Like I had David Grant on the show.
Yeah.
So I went to college with David, so I've known him forever. But he was like in England in like these libraries with his little tiny glasses, looking through. When he was doing the wager research. Did you have to do that? Did you have to like go to these English libraries?
No, because Cook was so famous and his voyages have been studied by so many different kinds of scholars over the years. Almost everything has been digitized, has been scanned and digitized. I did go to the British Library and their National Archives, kind of for a different reason, which David Grant also talks about, is like, there's just something about holding these things in your hands and smelling them and feeling them and kind of connecting with history that way. That's an ineffable very cool, evocative thing that you can do. But I really didn't have to, luckily, in terms of just getting the material, which is fortunate because it's really hard to understand, to comprehend a lot of these notes, in the raw form before they're digitized and typeset, because people wrote differently back then. They all these curly Q's and ampersands and ye this and ye that, strange spellings, strange punctuation, seemingly arbitrary capitalization of words. It was like going back in time and communing with history and dead people, but also a weird and different way of communicating the English language.
Yeah, I wonder if they're going to look back in 200 years and look at our texts and be like, this strange people with their acronyms and their,
Right. It's going to be strange, like a hieroglyphic kind of thing. But once you get, the actual voice down on the page and you're able to get through the ampersands and the weird spellings, I was amazed at how well they wrote and how well it flows and how modern it sounds and seems once you get rid of the ye's this and ye that, and it's like these people knew how to write. And
I know we've lost that. It's very sad, right?
And they took the time to write, and they also, let's just face it, they speak the King's English. They were better at communicating and more literate, yes, than I think the average American was at that time.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, that was on the English side.
Right.
So the Polynesian side's a little trickier, or just not even just Polynesian, but all the indigenous people that they encountered on this.
A lot trickier, but you do the best you can with the materials you have to work with. There is oral history that has been passed down, some of which I mostly relied on oral history that had been taken down like 150 years ago, like a while ago. So that these were people, particularly in Hawaii, who were indigenous Hawaiians who learned English, and also the missionaries came to Hawaii and they came up with an alphabet for the Polynesian language. And these were early historians who went around taking down the oral history from the elders. And so, you're dealing with oral history that's, one generation ago.
Yeah.
Two at the most. And that's more reliable, I'm afraid, than oral history that you might get today from some average person. Because right. I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
Exactly. And these aren't people that were there. I mean, now they've heard it from their grandparents.
Right. Let alone someone, what my great grandmother thought and felt and did on a certain day.
Right.
In the 1700s. So, you fill that in also by traveling to these places and reading the anthropology that's been done, some of the archaeology work that has been done, and triangulating all this stuff and just doing the best you can. It was tough. It was really tough to try to make this three-dimensional, and I was frustrated sometimes that I couldn't get a better feel for some of these remote places where Cook had this penchant for anchoring in very beautiful places, but also very remote places that are hard to get to even today.
Yeah. Did you try? Have you tried to get this? This is a good assignment for you. Like, I get to go to Hawaii. So where did you go to any of the places?
Certainly the beauty of these places was not lost on me or my wife.
Right.
We did travel to a lot of these spots. One place, for example, where Cook anchored to repair his ships, he spent a whole month in this place. It's called Nootka Sound, which is on Vancouver Island. And, it doesn't sound like it'd be that difficult to get to, but it is. I mean, you fly to Vancouver and then you get over to Vancouver Island and you're in a car and then you're on.
It's a big island. I was just in Vancouver Island last year. It's a
very
big,
large.
It's large. Yeah.
It's very remote and there's only so many roads.
Yeah.
And then once you get, then we got on a boat and then we got on a kayak and then we finally got on a little raft thing, a little inflatable thing to get finally to Nootka Sound, to this spot where they spent a whole month. And I don't know. It was a little bit sort of like a Where's Waldo thing, like
Yeah.
where's Cook now? Where it's like, oh, he's in a very difficult to reach spot, and it became almost like a scavenger hunt to see how
Yeah.
many of these spots I could get to.
Well, that's one of the things and many of the things I really loved about your book, but just sort of like you take this voyage with Cook, and you see it from his eyes, but you also see it from the indigenous people's eyes.
Yeah.
And, these people, many times it's the first time they've encountered each other, or it's certainly, it's the first time some of these indigenous people had even seen a European before. And I loved like that, it just being in that world, you really transported us back to, it's just hard to imagine that there was a time like that right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's there's just something kind of magical about these first contact experiences in both directions. Both the Cook and his men were amazed and astonished by so many of these islands and these islanders that they encountered, and so were they, the islanders, astounded by these strange looking people who came in on these strange looking ships, and
They thought they were gods oftentimes, right?
yeah, or some kind of supernatural beings, or perhaps they thought, well, who knows? We they could be violent. They could. This could be dangerous. This could be malevolent. There is this brief moment in time, island after island after island, where no one knows what's going to happen. It could be this amazing, beautiful thing. It could be very quickly a violent situation, the clashing of two worlds. In most cases, I think what's pretty extraordinary is that Cook had peaceful encounters with almost all of these people along the way. Things, it's kind of remarkable that he wasn't killed earlier in his career. Because, a lot of this was still kind of the golden age of exploration, and a lot of these captains had first encounter experiences, one or two or three. Captain Cook had like 40. He just like a whole new people that he's never experienced. They weren't on the maps there. They weren't on the charts. And here he is trying to describe a whole new people in Australia, on Tasmania, in New Zealand, in Tonga, in the Cook Islands, as we call them, although that name is probably going to be changed. He goes to Easter Island, he goes to the Hawaiian Islands and is the first European discoverer there. And then and as if that's not good enough, he goes all the way to the Northern Hemisphere, goes up and charts the entire coast of the North American continent, Oregon, Washington, Vancouver Island, all the way up to Alaska and through the Bering Strait, encountering again all these different people that have never experienced Europeans before, for better or worse. Now, of course, we know that Cook was the sharp end of the spear, you might say, of colonialism. And even though he was principally just a map maker and an explorer, he set in motion a whole set of things that changed these places forever, and mostly for the worse.
Right.
In terms of introducing germs, pathogens, alcohol,
venereal diseases. Yeah.
Yeah, and here come the seal hunters and the fur hunters and the whalers and the missionaries and so forth, and rewiring these societies and unraveling them in many ways. And that's why he's controversial, and that's why, even though he's primarily just an explorer, exploration is almost by definition the first phase of conquest. And so that's why his statues are coming down.
Yeah, I understand it, but yet I can't see an alternative history. Like I can't imagine, what is going to happen.
Yeah. Well, one alternative history I like to think about, given the fact that the Polynesians were such incredible long distance navigators who populated through a series of planned migrations, they populated the entire, what we now call the Polynesian Triangle, which is many thousands of miles distance across the oceans. I like to think of this scenario where, what if they came to England first
Mm.
It wouldn't be that far-fetched to think they could have somehow discovered Europe first, before the Europeans discovered them. And how would that have changed history? How would that have how would they have been treated as they came ashore at Plymouth or something like that? I don't know. I'm not sure what would happen, but I think it's a plausible alternative reality that could have occurred.
Well, hey, friends, the warm weather is here. So exciting. And that means lots more time for outdoor activities, renewed energy, and just a great time to refresh your wellness routine with a great tasting daily health drink. And for me, that drink is AG1. And how much do I love AG1? Well, let me count the ways right here. First of all, it tastes really good. Very important for me. It doesn't just taste like I'm biting into a bunch of vegetables. It actually has a wonderful, refreshing, almost sweet taste, although there's no sugar in it. It helps with my digestion for sure. My energy levels seem to be pretty high when I'm on AG1, and my skin seems to be a lot clearer. If that's not enough for you, I don't know what is. So if you're looking for a really good, delicious, healthy drink, AG1 is offering my new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of D3K2, and 5 free travel packs, which are really handy when you're going on vacation, especially in a nutrition desert where there's just not a lot of healthy food. So make sure to check out drinkag1.com/right about now. That's drinkag1.com/right about now and get that special deal. All right, back to the podcast. In case people are not that familiar with Captain Cook, and I'll admit that when I picked up your book, I knew his name and I knew that he had something to do with Hawaii, but I wasn't really sure. Like I didn't know a lot about him. So I was actually probably the perfect person to read your book because I was just like, everything was like, whoa, I didn't know that happened.
Right.
So he is like you said, I guess he would consider himself an explorer and a map maker. I mean, that's what he was. He was not a conqueror. He wasn't like one of these guys that went with a bunch of soldiers to conquer. That's not really. He might have brought conquering in his wake, which that was not his job. His job was to map stuff and explore new areas, right?
Yeah, and to describe, new species of animals, plants, people, new peoples that have never been, encountered, and to solve various geographical or cartographic puzzles that, the armchair scientists back in England wanted to find out about, like just go discover a new continent, or the Northwest Passage, of course, which was one of the great obsessions of the British.
Right. So let's talk about that. That was the real goal of this particular voyage. This third voyage that you chronicle so well was this. Tell us about his assignment. Like, what was his assignment?
Yeah. The real purpose of the third voyage was to find the Northwest Passage, a shortcut over or through northern Canada that would connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, so that the British could trade more easily and get much more quickly over to Asia, to India, China, Indonesia, all of that, and also so they could avoid the Spanish and the Portuguese, who kind of had control over the southern seas, the South America and so forth, and that whole route across the the tip of South America was very dangerous and very time consuming, and a lot of people lost their lives trying to get to the Pacific Ocean from that way. So they've been looking for it for a long, long time. All these expeditions had gotten sort of stuck in the ice in Greenland or various places in eastern Canada. Usually the story goes quickly into the classics, scurvy, mutiny, cannibalism, all the fun stuff. But Captain Cook's mission was to do it slightly differently, to look at try to find this Northwest Passage by going to the other side of the North American continent, to Alaska, as we now call it, to kind of, they were aware of Bering's expeditions,
Mhm.
Bearing,
He
who
was
was,
before maybe 40 years earlier or 100
yeah,
years
and they produced some maps that were very vague. Turned out they were like cartoonishly wrong.
earlier. Right.
Um, and so do some exploring and look for that Northwest Passage from the Pacific side, going east, looking for the Atlantic. Um, and why they thought it would go any better for Cook than it had for all those other previous explorers, I don't know. Once you get stuck in the ice, nothing goes well. They go north, and then everything goes south. They say.
Nice. Yeah. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, that was the main purpose of this voyage, and it was weird because the American Revolution was just getting started.
Right. They left on 1776, right? That's when
They left in July, yeah, of
July of 1776. That's wild.
They didn't quite get the memo about the Declaration of Independence, but here they are. The revolution is starting, and they're going to the other side of the North American continent to expand the reach of the empire and perhaps create new colonies up there. And really, in a very direct way, did lead to the creation of British Columbia. Um, the British presence there, started by Cook, leads directly to the creation of Vancouver and Vancouver.
Well, wasn't there a sailor on his a marine on his boat named by the name Vancouver? Didn't you
Yes,
say? Yeah.
not a Marine. He was a midshipman, and
Okay.
a young officer who would go on to become the famous explorer Vancouver, for which both the city and the island are named for. Yeah.
Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah, everyone, all the talented young Navy people, I mean, they wanted to study under Cook. They wanted to learn from Cook. He was a great map maker, as we've discussed, but he was also a great captain. He was someone who kept his men safe. Not a single man died of scurvy on his expeditions. He was very interested in their welfare and their diet, and there was a tremendous loyalty that he generated. Almost, so many of these guys who were on his first voyage signed up for his second, and then his third. So he was a great captain in so many different ways, leader of men and so forth. That's why men like Vancouver signed up.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that he brings along on the Resolution. The one, including these scientists and naturists and Vancouver and all these people, and a lot of farm animals. But there's one person that you talk a lot about in the book, and his name is Mai. Can you tell us a little bit about who Mai is and why you focused on Mai so much?
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about how important I thought it was to try to get the Polynesian perspective on things. And I realized that I had this opportunity in the character of Mai to not only get the Polynesian perspective, but actually to have a major character who is Polynesian and had this extraordinary experience. So Mai was the first Polynesian to set foot on English soil. He came to England as part of Cook's second voyage around the world, and he was a big hit. I mean, England rolled out the red carpet for him, starting with King George III and Lord Sandwich of the Admiralty, but also the various aristocrats. He learned to kind of live the life out there on those estates. He became a hunter. He learned backgammon and chess, and they kind of dressed him up in fine clothes.
Right.
They also kind of patronizingly studied him. Like, who is this guy? Is this the noble savage that Rousseau is talking about? Because he seemed to have very good manners, and he comported himself very well at the dinner table. And they're like almost like studying him to see how quickly he learns English manners. But overall, he had a great time, honestly. And it was a very interesting experiment, sort of in cross-cultural exchange, you might say. But after 2.5 years, Mai becomes quite homesick. He wants to go back to Tahiti. And so King George III says, "We'll get you home, and Captain Cook will take you home. He will be essentially your chauffeur." And so Cook, on his way to Alaska, has to make this stop in Tahiti and drop off Mai,
Right.
with all these belongings that he has accumulated in England. Mai has like a full suit of armor, and he has a Jack in the Box. He has a Bible. He has a globe of the earth. He has um, a lot of guns and swords and all kinds of ammunition. Um, and those animals that you mentioned that were destined for Tahiti. King George III had this idea that we being England, needed to transport a bunch of farm animals to Tahiti to see how they would do, and to sort of bestow upon the poor Polynesians some sense of a beautiful, wonderful English farm.
Yeah.
Believe me, the Polynesians ate very well. They were eating better than the English. Fresh seafood every day. Breadfruit, fruit, vegetables. But for some reason, King George thought they needed horses, cows, peacocks, chickens, sheep, goats, and so consequently, the first half of the voyage, Cook is it's like Noah's Ark. I mean, he's
And it's hard to have animal like livestock on your ship. Like they get hungry and
it just stinks.
They must stink, and
the smell of urine and feces, and a lot of them are thrown around in the holds of the ship and are getting hurt because they're on the high seas. And it introduced a whole different level of complexity to the voyage to try to keep these animals alive and get them to Tahiti with Mai. But that's what Cook had to do. So animals figure prominently in the story.
They do. And Mai does too. And Mai, when he gets back, he's not. If the thing people have to understand about Mai, he wasn't like royalty, right? He was just kind of like a common man,
Right.
a regular guy. And so when he gets back, and they kind of want to reintegrate him, he's not always so accepted, by the people.
Yeah, it's a very Tahiti then was a very socially stratified society. You are, what your station in life, whatever you're born into, is pretty much permanent. And he comes to Tahiti now with all these belongings. He's actually quite rich, in terms of physical things now.
Yeah.
And he's had this life experience that none of the chiefs or priests have had. So they don't know what to do with him. He's
Right.
like, he's not English.
Yeah.
He's not really Tahitian anymore. He's kind of this man without a country. And he's wealthy in a sense, but he's still a commoner as far as they're concerned. And you can never change that. You can never rise above or transcend your origins. At least that was a very rare thing. The story of Mai is kind of bittersweet because what happens to him when he returns is quite sad. I won't go into all the details, but it's things do not go well for him in the end because he sort of doesn't know where he belongs in the world. And this is kind of I guess some of the unintended consequences of these long distance voyages and these kind of cross cultural exchanges is they don't always end well for the person doing the traveling.
No. Although I want to talk about, one thing you talk about in the book, and I know it's like a delicate subject, but let's talk about it anyway, is the, a lot of the sort of the sexual escapades of the crew. So what ends up happening, and I'll let you go in more detail, but, they, for whatever reason, and you can explain why, there is a lot of sexual escapades between the crews of these ships and the local, and some of it is even like paid. It's not even transactional, at least at first. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you chose to include that in the book?
Well, I mean, it's everywhere in the journals of these men. You have to remember that most of them were, horny young sailors.
Yeah, right. And they're like trapped in a boat for years.
And they're 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. Most of the kind of common seamen or the able seamen are young. And they're in it for the adventure. And they had heard rumors that particularly Tahiti and some of the other Polynesian islands, for whatever reason, there were many women who seemed to be quite willing to engage intercourse. And so, of course,
Right.
they were very interested in that. Now, I certainly asked myself the question immediately, like, what on earth could these women have possibly found attractive about these hairy, stinky, smelly sailors who, have been at sea for many, many months? And and I know there's a lot of questions about, like, well, were they taken advantage of, or did the women, were the men, perhaps the women told by the men on the island, by the priests and the chiefs and the elders to go have these sexual experiences, perhaps to, I don't know, find out something about Cook's men, try to co-opt them, or there was it, in many of the islands. It was transactional. It was like literally for the price of a nail, you could have a sexual encounter. A lot of nails went missing from the ship, so much so that Captain Cook began to worry that the Resolution was going to disintegrate.
They would just pull them out of the wall, pull them out of the.
Right.
That's wild.
I don't know. Some of these women, I'm sure they were curious about who these people were. Some of them lived on islands where, they had never seen anything new in the way of fresh blood, you might say, for millennia. And here comes something entirely new. There were some genuine romances that developed too. It wasn't just, these sexual encounters on the beach, and it's over. A number of men tried to desert with their lovers and go up into the mountains and get away from the voyage. Of course, this was paradise. I mean, for these Englishmen, they've never seen a place like Tahiti. Beautiful weather, beautiful landscape, really friendly people. And, they wanted to desert, many of them. And Cook would track them down.
Yeah.
Cook would track them down and make them get back in the ship. But, yeah, the whole sexual thing is interesting. I trimmed it way back at my editor's suggestion, but it's still in there. I mean, it's at every port.
Maybe there's a book in just that part. Somebody could read that book. Well, what's interesting is that Cook, to his, I mean, and maybe this is slightly controversial, he doesn't really partake in that, at least according to what your records that you read. He's not really interested in that. Like he doesn't. He stays. Faithful to his wife.
Cook is married to a woman named Elizabeth, and he has children back home in England. And by all accounts, he did not go ashore and have sex with the local ladies.
Right.
Even his enemies, the people who really didn't like Cook, when they wrote their journals or wrote their descriptions, they said, yeah, he never did that. He was also very concerned about the spread of venereal disease, that, he knew some of his men had it, and he worried that they were going to go ashore and spread it among the local people. And they did. It happened. It happened from island to island to island. It also happened with the French explorers and the Dutch explorers and a lot of the other Europeans. But he was so sort of abstinent. That's the word. He abstained to such an extent that some critics of Cook, who talk about some of his strange behavior on his third voyage, attribute it to being, like sexually, what's the word? Sexually suppressed.
Very Victorian, I guess. Yeah.
This is a Freudian idea, I guess. This, like, if he had just gone ahead and had sex with some of these ladies on these long voyages, maybe he wouldn't have been had all of this pent up rage and all these strange behavioral tendencies that you get on his third voyage, where he loses it.
Let's talk about that. So he does. I mean, a lot of your book is about him losing it and trying to dive into that idea, because it ultimately leads perhaps to his demise and death. But, one of the things that really struck me is he's pretty harsh, like to not only to his crew, but like in some ways he's incredibly warm and, and open-minded with the indigenous people that he encounters. But in other cases, he's like really harsh, his punishments and can you talk a little bit about that and like what's going on there?
Yeah, that's one of the mysteries of the third voyage, is that Cook is different. He's not the same guy that you saw on voyages 1 and 2. There's more cruelty. He's more frequently using the lash on his own guys. He's like, alone in his cabin much of the time, but then he has incredible anger. He just has temper tantrums. he is increasingly cruel to the indigenous people that he encounters. And people are wondering what is up with this guy. I mean, this isn't the same guy. And, some writers have almost likened it to, something like um, Kurtz in Heart of
Or yeah,
Darkness.
I was thinking about that. I was
This
thinking of
sort of
Apocalypse Now. Yeah, it's very
this
Apocalypse Now.
Conradian descent into madness. Well, I don't think that's what's going on. It's more episodic. He has good days and bad days. We see the old explorer in plenty of episodes, but then he'll just completely lose it. And so
Like, what are some of the things? What is one of the things that really struck you as like, wow, I can't believe he did that?
well, there's an island just to the west of Tahiti called Moorea, and on that island, one of his goats was stolen because they'd never seen goats before. They were fascinated by goats, and one of them went missing, and um, he wanted it back. So what does he do? He grossly overreacts. He essentially goes on a scorched earth campaign and destroys every hut and every canoe that he sees on the island. And he basically just he doesn't kill anybody, but he destroys so much property, demanding, like, I'll just keep doing this until you bring me the goat back. So it was like he was willing to almost destroy an island for the price of one goat.
And these are right, and these are like, yeah, it's horrible. And also, like, some of these canoes and it were like these works of art, these like things that took
Right.
years to make, and he just like,
Right, and this was their livelihood, and this was like everything, for the price of this goat. And so his men are like, "What is up with him?" Like they couldn't
right,
believe it. It was such an overreaction, and a similar set of circumstances leads to his own death in Hawaii, where he loses his temper. But I was just going to say that the kind of leading theory that I think is a pretty plausible one is that he had a parasite.
hmm,
um, that almost all these explorers had weird parasites from all the travel and all the weird food that they ate, and a parasite can cause you to lose, prevent the absorption of critical minerals and vitamins that can literally lead to sort of a form of brain damage,
hmm.
and that might explain a lot of these kind of episodes he has. And we know from modern times that that a parasite can cause brain damage. I mean, look at RFK Jr. What happened to him with that worm?
Yeah, the damn worm.
So
We're all paying for the damn worm.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So anyway, that's a pretty good theory, I think. But
yeah,
I mean, he's also older. He's grumpier. He's got a lot of pain in various parts of his body. He had sciatica on this voyage. He, he's not. You know, some people said he shouldn't have gone on this voyage. That he was getting too old for this, and that he really, he basically was yanked out of retirement to
yeah.
do
How
this.
old was he?
Well,
How,
I know this doesn't sound old, but he turns 50 on this voyage.
okay.
And a sea captain, someone who's been in his sea his entire life, that's actually getting on up there.
Yeah. Right.
And he'd seen so much and put his body through so much that I'm sure those were all factors that led to this sort of personality transformation. But I still think the parasite theory is the best one.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm wondering now if I have a parasite. Anyway,
Might
uh,
get it checked out.
that might explain a lot. Well, without giving away too much of the end, can we talk a little bit about what happens in Hawaii in his final days? It's just so interesting. Could you give us a little broad stroke of what happens?
Yeah, I think if Captain Cook, at least in America, is known for anything, it is for dying. Having a very graphic death, a very violent death on the Big Island of Hawaii, and it is a kind of clash of cultures that has been chronicled in all kinds of ways: comic books, operas, plays, beautiful and intricate paintings. It's something that is, I guess, kind of part of the iconography of exploration. This sort of like, and it also is interesting because what happened to Cook in many ways is this exact same thing that happened to Magellan, uh, the other great explorer that Cook talked about in his journals as the greatest. You know, Magellan was the first to circumnavigate the world, although he didn't make it home. So you could argue he didn't actually. He personally did his mission made it home. His ships made it home, but not him. He was killed on one of the Philippine islands, and got too involved in local politics, basically, and they just hacked him to pieces right on the beach.
Hmm.
That's what happened to Cook too. He got involved in one of his rowboats was stolen, and he got really mad. And instead of like having his junior officers come ashore and negotiate the return of the stolen rowboat, he himself storms ashore and tries to kidnap the king of Hawaii, who is considered not only the king but a religious figure, a god, really.
Hmm.
And but he had a really good army. He had warriors who defended him, and they got their dander up real quick, and things escalated in a real hurry. And there was this conflagration there that led to the death of, I think, 4 or 5 of the Royal Marines, at least 20 warriors, and Cook himself is hacked and bashed to pieces.
Violent. Yeah. Super violent.
And what's weird and really kind of tragic is that most of his men are out on the ships, just too far away to do anything about it, but close enough where they can watch the whole thing unfold, almost like, an amphitheater, and they're just watching their captain just get ripped to shreds. And it's something that still, you go down to the site this is on the Kona coast of the Big Island, a place called Kealakekua Bay it's a gorgeous, wonderful, beautiful place, beautiful snorkeling. But it has some bad juju. There's it's it's kind of creepy when you go down there. And there's an obelisk that was erected by the British to designate the spot and memorialize the spot where he was killed on Valentine's Day in 1779, and that obelisk is quite controversial. It's been vandalized repeatedly. It's complicated.
Yeah,
and I do spend the last, say, 50 pages of the book kind of telling the story of his death and all the little things that led, almost like a Greek tragedy, to his death. And it's something that has been studied ever since by anthropologists and by different writers. Mark Twain went there a century later and studied it from all angles and came up with his own conclusion that it was justifiable homicide.
Oh boy.
And there's all sorts of questions about whether Cook was eaten. The native Hawaiians insist absolutely that he was not. But his bones his body was burnt, and the remaining flesh was scraped off his bones, and the bones were spread out all over the island as relics. There's all sorts of questions about what happened to him and the Marines who died that day. But
and let's say that nobody was happy with this outcome. I mean, neither side, right? Like obviously the people on Cook's ship were devastated. I mean, a lot of the people on that ship, Cook was like a father figure, and he's a legend. So it's traumatic for them. And then I think it seems like on the Hawaiian side, a lot of people, were upset with how it was handled. Yeah, it was everybody was upset about it. It wasn't so simple. Yeah,
everyone lost.
Everybody lost.
But when Cook's ships do finally return to England in 1780. 1780, Cook becomes, of course, England is shocked to hear the story of what happened to the captain, but he's almost quickly deified, as this great martyr of exploration, and all these statues are erected, and he becomes perhaps even more important in death, than he was in life. And those are the statues, of course, that are coming down now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's like if he had not died in this way, I don't know what would have happened in terms of his reputation, his legacy. He might have just gone down as a really excellent, very competent explorer, and that would have been the end of it. But because he died in this violent way, uh, almost like an assassination or something, we get a much more complicated legacy, and the British felt this need to kind of put him on a pedestal, as the greatest explorer of all time, which he was certainly in the pantheon of
I
great
mean,
explorers, no doubt about it. But
yeah.
they handled it differently because of the violent nature, I think, of his death.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, what did you, so you, after spending so much time researching his life and as a historian, you had a lot of probably preconceptions going into this about who he was. Did you come out the other end thinking about him a little bit differently?
Yeah, I think so. Most Americans, a lot of Americans get him mixed up with other captains,
Mhm.
real and imaginary, like Captain Kirk and Captain
Well,
Crunch, and
Captain Kidd.
especially Captain Hook. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I mean, so many people thought, well, you must be writing about a pirate, right? You're writing that guy with the. I still get that all the time from actually very knowledgeable people. Captain Hook was a pirate in Peter Pan, fictional character, but no, this was Captain Cook. I definitely came to admire him for many, many, many of his qualities. First and foremost, just that the way he rose up from a complete obscurity, from complete poverty. Most of the high-ranking officers in the Navy of that time had money, or they had connections, they had standing, they had prestige somehow. He didn't. He came from nothing, and he worked his way up through sheer genius as an astronomer, a mathematician, and a map maker, to the highest ranks of the Admiralty. And he remained to the end of his days very modest. He was not an arrogant guy. He never, for example, named a single physical feature in all the places that he mapped and discovered. He never named anything after himself,
Mm,
which was unheard
that
of.
is kind of incredible. A lot of sandwiches and things like that. Yeah,
He
but
named
not
a lot
him.
of things after his bosses and
Yeah.
various aristocrats and King George's family and so forth. But no, nothing after himself. And it was his prerogative to do that. A lot of the explorers named all sorts of things after themselves. Um, the Another thing I admired a lot about him was that when he definitively learned the name of a place that had a native name, he put that on the map. Is if he definitively learned. So it was, and it was also like if a previous explorer had been there first and named something, whether it was Magellan or a French explorer like Bougainville or whatever, he honored their names for things. He was like very conscious of like who came before. He wasn't just thumping his own chest. It's talking about what I've done. And then the last thing is, I do think throughout his journal there are little moments where he begins to show some real doubt about these expeditions, like thinking that it's not good for these people that they're visiting. He sees changes in these cultures. He sees how their economies change. He's seen, new diseases introduced to these people. He really, I think, doesn't believe it's particularly good for them. And that's pretty rare to be that reflective. Back then, most captains didn't bother to think about stuff like that.
I feel like from the way you've depicted him, he's very respectful of these cultures. I mean, he obviously, when the worm gets him, the parasite gets him, he gets a little bit, angry. But I think that he would have been angry at anybody. I don't think it doesn't seem to be that it has to be the fact that they're, who they are. So yeah, I thought there was a certain amount of respect and admiration, which was probably very unusual at that time. And there was a lot of racism at that time, obviously. And so I did admire that about him.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier Captain Kirk, and in fact, Star Trek was, in many ways patterned after Captain Cook's voyages.
Hmm.
Captain James Captain James Cook, the USS Enterprise, the HMS Endeavour, which was Cook's first ship, going where no man has gone before, boldly going where no, is a direct paraphrase of something Cook wrote. And there was this sense back then in which Cook might as well have been going to another galaxy, to another planet. They left England and you never heard from them again till they returned. And they were going from island to island to island. Each island was different cultures, different experiences. And, they were supposed to go in peace and document and collect data and describe new species, very much like Captain Kirk in Star Trek, and it's so there are a lot of interesting parallels there.
For sure. All right, I'm going to let you go. Curious, because whenever you tackle a subject that's going to be really interesting, have you already started working on your next book?
Yes, I'm pretty deep into a new Western story.
Oh, great! It's my favorite type.
I wrote a book called Blood and Thunder that came out a number of years ago, and this is now my return to the West. It's about the Colorado Territory during the Civil War and a series of events that lead to this really seismic episode called the Sand Creek Massacre that involves the Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians, and it follows a series of characters through this maelstrom of events that culminates in the Sand Creek Massacre. So I
read a Michener book about that time, so I love that.
Centennial, probably.
Yeah, Centennial. Yeah. I'm excited to read that. That's a really exciting time. And your Kit Carson is now next on my list to read. I'm excited.
Well, check that one out. This is kind of a companion volume to that.
Okay.
And I have this notion of ultimately writing completing a trilogy of the American West, but this will be volume number 2 in that trilogy.
Well, that's exciting. Well, Hampton Sides, by the way, you have the greatest name for a writer I've ever heard.
It's really my name. That's my mom.
I can't believe it.
My mom called me it. I hated my name growing up because it led to a lot of annoying nicknames like Hambone and Ham Sub. And
listen, my last name is Small, so I'm right with you. I mean,
okay, you must have done a lot of
there was a lot of abuse.
But I love my name now because it's memorable as a writer, and people frequently say it can't be real, right? It's just
I was like, it's just too good. It's you have to almost be famous with a name like Hampton Sides. Like there's no other. I love it. Well, anyway, you are really one of the great historical writers writing today. So I'm so excited to have finally met you and to be able to talk about this fantastic book. All the information about how to get the book are going to be in the notes of this podcast. So please order it and read it. We've only touched the surface. That's a kind of almost a nautical term. The surface that we've just treaded water in this one. So Hampton, have a wonderful, enjoy the rest of your book tour. And thank you for coming on the show.
It's been a real pleasure. Much appreciated.
Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you'd like to support the show, there are a few ways to do it. One is to just scroll down and give me a nice big star review, maybe even write a review. It goes a long way in helping the algorithm point people towards my podcast. You can also subscribe to my Substack, which is called Small Talk. Get it? Because I'm John Small. And would love to connect with you there. And if you'd like to reach out directly, my email, as always, is jonathan@rightaboutnowmedia.com. Well, until next time, this is John Small, encouraging you to do the right thing.